So this is very exciting. We're going to hear from our host in just a little bit, but a couple of basic rules. Um, as a matter of fact, part of our interactive session is you're going to be able to ask questions of the panelists. So you're going to be given a mic. And if you haven't done karaoke, who has not done karaoke? Okay. Well, all of us know you want to hold your mic on an angle. A lot of people go like this, and it's a kind of wagging the tail of a dog, right? Or they'll talk like this, right? They'll talk like this. Look what happens when you talk like this. This is how we want you to ask the question. So back here, if you have a question of this is for panelists so-and-so, their name will be on the screen. My question is, and try to, again, there's no doubt in my mind, many of you speak English very well. Many of you speak English maybe not so well. Trust me, I know a second language where I can get by very minimally. So first off, to all of you that are multilingual, and just give yourself a hand, by the way. Let's applause, because we want to learn how to applause as well. Okay. But hold your mic like this when you ask a question. When we get to that point, we have people that'll be around the room. And if you have a question, you're going to raise your hand, and then we'll have microphones like this. Grab the mic, take a breath, and then you'll hold it like a slight angle like this. Because remember, if you talk like this, it's not good. If you talk like this, right? So you want to just talk like this. And again, if you've done karaoke, own it, right? Okay, now let's try applauding again, because life is simple. Strong or weak. That applaud last just a second ago was weak. Let's applaud. Ready? Now, let's do it. Keep it going. Keep it going. Okay, good. Okay, that's good. Now, just like a TV show, when the cameras start, you might be on camera applauding. And how many have seen a TV show come together? Have you ever been to a TV show? Okay, one. But you know what's happening. There's a person that comes in a half hour early and says, now listen to me, people. You applaud like this, right? Okay. So that being said, how are we doing on time, Gary? Should we wait a couple of more minutes for our people to join? Yeah. Let's do a mic check on Janelle's lav. Have we got her wired up? A moderator? Levels are good? Okay. Again, last chance to hit the restroom. If you need to, boom. Otherwise, we're going to be here, and we believe we'll wrap up at about noon. I'll be back in just a sec. Can you change me to a lav?
Yeah.
I'll keep this down here for her.
Okay, I just pushed.
screen is open. If I see that you need any.
Huh? Great, perfect. Okay, good.
Ladies and gentlemen, for those of us who are joining us online today, we're going to be starting here in about 2 minutes. Please keep your mics muted until you're ready to speak, and we'll be starting here shortly. Thank you.
Mic is unmuted. Oh, yes. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with an applause, and I'm going to do a quick little intro, right? And then we're going to introduce our host today, and we'll start our program. All right? So on 3, 2, 1, let's applause. Thank you, everybody. Okay, we just heard that, right? Thank you, everybody. I'm Bob Singerman, and I'm on the World Partnerships team. Welcome to History. This is the first in the history of the State Department and the first in the history of the International Visitor Program leadership program, any event like this, such as streaming. And we're streaming to countries around the world, and we're so excited. And what's really awesome is you really are part of history. We're in the beautiful interactive studios of Nielsen, the world's leader in media and communications and global data and knowledge capturing. And they are truly, truly amazing. And to start the program off, what I'd like to do is introduce our host today. Will you help me warmly welcome Miss Amy Rettig? She is the Senior VP, Community Relations and Florida Site Manager.
Good morning. Thank you, Bob. I should say good morning here in Tampa Bay, but across the globe, it may be a little bit different time of day. So thank you all for being here. We are ecstatic. We are so excited that you would be with us here at our Global Technology and what we call Innovation Center. It's 15 years old. 15 years ago, in 2003, we coined the term Global Technology and Information Center. We've changed it. We are innovating products here in this particular facility, Nielsen's largest facility in the world, and we are working on projects that we're really excited about. Machine learning, obviously AI and ML are big today, so any artificial intelligence and machine learning specialist in the house or across the globe, we'd love to meet you, because we have a brand new CEO at Nielsen who's extremely knowledgeable and extremely excited about taking Nielsen to the next level when it comes to data collection and providing truth. And so I think that's extremely important to bring up to this group and journalists that are here. We have hosted your group in smaller doses a number of times, and we've loved it. So thank you for allowing us to be a part of this and to host you all today. It is extremely exciting and as mentioned, something that we have been looking forward to with working with World Partnerships. So as mentioned too, since this is Nielsen's largest facility, I should say to you that we are represented in over 106 countries and have been in business for 95 years. And I did bring a picture of this facility so that our friends that are watching, wherever they're at, we have some students, we have some folks and journalists from across the globe, but we're very proud of this facility because it is about 611,000 square feet of space. And again, not only is it our largest facility as far as the footprint, but it is our largest facility with the number of employees. So for us, this is it. This is our hub, and it is the Tech and Innovation Center. So with the topic today, we have folks that work within cybersecurity and information technology, and of course, engineering and technology. And the people in the room, I hate to tell those that are just watching that they'll be taking a tour a little bit later. So we're excited to showcase this to those that are in-house, and I'll extend an open invitation to those that are watching that we love to open this up, especially to students from across the world who might be visiting Tampa Bay. And when that happens, I think this year in 2018, we'll host close to 2,000 students. And so that is part of our passion, part of our mission to explain a little bit more about what Nielsen does. So if you'll allow me that opportunity a little bit later, for those of you in the room, and you get a little bit later invitation for those of you watching. But again, extremely excited and very, very happy to have you. As mentioned, you'll hear from us a little bit later. I'll share with you a little bit more information with my colleague, William Miller, who's our resident tour guide. So later this afternoon. But with that, I know you want to turn it over to an extremely important program. And I will benefit from hearing some of this as well. So thank you so much, and we'll talk a little bit later.
Thank you again, Amy. Thank you again, Amy. Thank you again, Amy. That was awesome. Thank you. All right, so I gave you that link. Something has been happening in parallel with all these great exchange programs, and a funny thing happened. Working with the team at World Partnerships, we have created their own television network available to be viewed worldwide. We call it World Partnerships Nation TV Network. Let's introduce it to them. Aaron? Real simply, World Partnerships Nation TV network is a television network, and it will be made up of channels from every country that serves, that are alumni with this incredible organization. So imagine you all have television on your that you watch, but imagine a TV network made up of channels of the countries. And the journalist, you heard about this the first of the year, is we're looking forward to establish news bureaus in all these countries. And it's the first time where journalists will be able to have a global platform to present the stories that are affecting their communities, their country, their nation. And nation, by the way, is the global word that transcends all boundaries. We are the nation, and we are the nation of world partnerships. If you watch news, Fox just branded themselves Fox Nation. We did it first, but Fox just did that. So that being said, I will tell you, I'm a seasoned veteran media producer for 40 years and the $1 Million Studios and all the rest, but everything changed when cell phones came out. And then when they added a selfie stick, look out. But as a journalist, imagine if you have a mic with a logo, all of a sudden you become an authority, and you really do. So these are the tools. You're going to learn more about it as we get into the first of the year, but you will be part of that journey if it resonates to you. And imagine if you can give us stories, if you can give us pictures, don't be surprised if we send you a check, pay you for that information. That's how news organizations work, and that's our vision for this organization. You'll hear more about it in the future. Right now, though, it gives me great pleasure to really officially commence the program. And I'm going to introduce the President and CEO of World Partnerships. It gives me great pleasure. Please help me warmly welcome Gary Springer.
I'm back here. Am I live, Aaron? I am live. Well, welcome everybody. We are absolutely delighted to have you all here in this spectacular studio setting that Nielsen has provided for us. We're also delighted to have a group of your fellow alumni who are going to be on a panel to talk about media responsibility and disinformation. I think you'll find it pretty interesting. Right now, we've got 3 that have come on. Unfortunately, one of our panelists from India will not be able to make it due to a death in his family this morning. And we're hoping that others will join in as the time goes through. But I assure you that the 3 and possibly 4 who are here will be pretty interesting folks for you all to not only hear but to interact with. And we greatly appreciate again Amy and Aaron back here. Aaron is our technical producer for putting this whole thing and allowing us to really enjoy this facility today. Bob said a little bit about World Partnerships, and I will be very brief about World Partnerships. 20 years ago, Mary Ellen Upton, who is the executive director who puts together our this program for you and with Pointer the other day. 20 years ago, Mary Ellen had a distressing vision. The vice minister of finance from Japan had shown up in the Tampa International Airport, and somebody told him to follow the signs so that he could make his way to a hotel and then to his meeting. She decided that that wasn't a really good idea for an area of 7 million odd people around here that wanted to become a bigger international place. And her vision landed with the International Visitor Leadership Program. 20 years ago, we had our first visitors, 3 visitors. This year, as of right now, with you all in-house, we have had 438 visitors this year from 135 countries. Wow. In those 20 years, we have had 5,000 visitors. The 5,000th visitor just showed up about a month ago from 190 countries. That's 4 less than the United Nations. So we're very, very proud of that and that vision coming to reality. Now, I will tell you, in the room today, or maybe in the hotel where they're in their sick bed, unfortunately. But somewhere in the room today is our 2000th journalist to visit during those 20 years. So give yourselves a round of applause for being the 2000th. So today we are delighted to have our moderator, Janelle Irwin Taylor, who is a very seasoned journalist and radio broadcaster. And Janelle is going to moderate the folks that we have up on the screen. And I think if you can go ahead and put them up on the screen, Aaron, we're ready to roll. Ground rules. Janelle, you want to go over those a little bit quickly? And,
Absolutely.
All right, have at it.
Ground rules are the most important thing is to not talk over each other because this is a online forum in which we have people broadcasting in from their respective countries. If people start talking at the same time, it's going to be incredibly difficult for us to understand and hear. Other than that, I just want this to be an open dialogue. I want us to be able to engage with these individuals and find out what goes on in their countries. How is it that they are best cutting through the disinformation that exists in an age of social media and online presence that has become very easy, quite frankly. So that's how I want this conversation to go, just very holistically, much like we like them to go in interviews in our profession. So with that, we're going to introduce our panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Janelle. We're really looking forward to this. Our three panelists who have arrived already, just so you guys know, you are live now. I see João Paulo Charlot on the left from Brazil. Julian Rademeyer in the middle from South Africa, and Marzena Suchan on the right from Poland. I think we're going to ask and welcome you guys and thank you for joining us in 8 different time zones or however it's working out these days. Janelle, I think we'll probably get started with Julian if we might.
Excellent. Okay, Julian, of course, is from South Africa. So we're going to give him just a little while here to introduce himself and talk about some of his work. Julian, if you want to just go ahead and take it away and introduce yourself to our group here live in Oldsmar, and then as well as those who are following along online.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a great privilege to participate in this. I mean, I was part of the IBLP in 2011. And it was, a particularly special occasion, bringing together journalists from a host of different African countries. I've been or have worked as an investigative journalist for a couple of the major sort of newspaper organizations in South Africa. I currently don't work as a journalist, although I do use some of those journalistic tools and skills. I work for Traffic, the International Wildlife Trade Monitoring Network. But a couple of years ago, and I think this is probably most relevant to this discussion, I was involved in establishing a fact-checking website in South Africa called Africa Check. This is in 2012. Very much modeled on websites like PolitiFact in the US, Full Fact in the UK. And it was filling a gap that hadn't really been filled. Up until fairly recently, it was the only fact-checking website of its kind in Africa. And trying to sort of deal with inaccurate statements by politicians, false claims, hoaxes, dealing with quack cures that are being touted for various things from Ebola to HIV and AIDS. And I think that that has led to, Africa Check started off with myself as the editor and one researcher working from home. We had one funder at the time. It's now grown into an organization of 25 people. Spread across, it has offices in Johannesburg in South Africa and Kenya, also in Senegal and Nigeria. And it's also helped galvanize a push within many of these countries to develop fact-checking. One of our largest news organizations in South Africa, News 24, which is a website, has recently started its own fact-checking work. Much of that also focusing on claims that are taking place in the run-up to next year's elections in South Africa. And we're going through an incredibly difficult time in South Africa. We have been for the last few years, where we've become increasingly polarized as a country, where politicians manipulate, obfuscate, use falsehoods to try and misdirect. Our former president, Jacob Zuma, was a past master at that, managing to keep corruption allegations and charges at bay for his entire presidency. He's still facing various corruption allegations and charges at the moment. And it became very ugly. You know, you saw a period where false intelligence dossiers were being shot to journalists. Fortunately, most journalists didn't go for them. Some did. And they were used to do extraordinary damage to some of the key institutions which were investigating corruption. Probably the most tragic fallout was the South African Revenue Service, which had a special investigations unit going after major sort of corrupt parties doing investigations into the illicit tobacco industry, looking into corruption in government. And that unit was essentially shut down after a false intelligence dossier was shot to the Sunday Times newspaper, and it was given credence by reports that they'd bugged the president's house, that they'd set up a brothel. All of these were false. But it damaged that unit, and so much has happened in some other key institutions, you know, the police crime intelligence units, the National Prosecuting Authority, where they've gradually been eroded over a period of time. And I think what's encouraging is that, you know, while journalism was abused in this case to destroy a unit that was investigating corruption, it was through the work of other investigative journalists that was exposed and ultimately corrected. And, you know, the real truth of what has happened there has begun coming out. But I think, you know, we've had a number of other incidents. Probably the most famous one was the UK public relations firm Bell Pottinger, which was hired by a family that had close ties to our former president, President Zuma, to essentially start a campaign to portray him as the victim of a conspiracy, that the corruption allegations were against him were a conspiracy, that this particular family that they represented, who were accused of siphoning off money and buying influence and power in South Africa, had themselves been the victims of a conspiracy. And they used quite a clever social media campaign, planting false stories, setting up Twitter bots, setting up fake websites, and trying to use the polarized nature of society in South Africa at the moment and tap into that as a tool of misdirection. And unfortunately, you know, while Bell Pottinger no longer exists and closed its doors and won't be sadly missed, the damage has been done, and the methods that they employed, that toxic legacy still continues to this day. So, you know, in brief, that's some of the things that we have had to grapple with. You know, at Africa Check, we were also doing a lot of work at looking at the extreme right and also the extreme left, and claims that were being made, some of them aimed at furthering the degree of racial polarization within South Africa. So I think that, you know, fact-checking organizations, investigative journalism is so crucial in these kinds of situations, you know, in countries that are still very fragile. You know, South Africa, 20 years after the death of apartheid, is still grappling with that legacy to this day, and still grappling with the massive disparities that exist in this country.
I'm hearing a lot of parallels to things that are happening all over the world. We're getting a little bit of an echo. Talk to me about what it's like in South Africa in terms of the friendliness for journalists. I know a lot of countries, some are easier than others to do our work and to do those fact-checking activities. What's it like in South Africa? How easy is it for you to do the work that you do?
I think, you know, South Africa is in the fortunate position that we have a very long history of investigative journalism and robust investigative journalism. We have a constitution that entrenches, freedom of speech. We, you know, in the run-up to the 2019 elections, we have seen a degree of ugliness emerging where politicians are targeting specific journalists, you know, claims people being harassed. One particular reporter recently who's been doing a lot of work looking at a party called the Economic Freedom Fighters, and allegations of corruption against them, has been targeted by their supporters on Twitter, and, you know, has received everything from death threats to threats of rape. But I think, you know, on the whole, you know, while that sort of picture is really unpleasant, and you know, the abuse that some journalists have been subjected to, we still have a country where you know, journalistic freedoms are entrenched and are fairly well protected. But it's a double-edged sword in a way. I think that, you know, at times, as a journalist working, you know, people feel that it could change very quickly, and particularly when you see the erosion of state structures. And the structures that are meant to protect journalists.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to move on and hear an introduction from another panelist. We have with us also Marzena Suchen. She is from Poland and is an editor-in-chief at news department. Correct me if I'm wrong here. On it? Want it?
On it. Yeah.
On it. All right, we're on it. All right, tell us a little bit about yourself, Marzena.
Okay, first of all, hi, thank you for invitation. It's so nice to see you all. You, Janelle, Gary, Marianne, Amy, and Cassandra. You saw one of our liaisons there. It's so nice to see you, and obviously João Paulo. So I'm very excited to join the conversation today. It's a great pleasure because we are all depressed after IVLP program ended, and it's good to see you again, at least like that, online. So thank you for invitation. Yes, I'm Marzena Suchen, and I lead the team of 33 people in news department at Onet. Onet is the biggest Polish news website, and we are online medium originally. We don't have any newspaper background, broadcasting background, so this is kind of company online only, digital only. And we run our newsroom like 24-hour TV, something like news TV, because we don't have deadlines. We have the news, we push it, we publish it on the website, and this is one of the biggest risks of being part of this information, by the way, because we are trying to be as fast as we can, and sometimes this temptation to be too fast can be very, very risky. So we have to remember that sometimes our let's say, hectic journalistic nature is one of the factors of disinformation, unfortunately, but we really have to say it and to be very, very responsible in everything we publish. It's obvious. I'm from Poland, and for the last 3 years we have Law and Justice Party in our government. It is a kind of far-right party. And I have to admit that the situation for the journalism and journalists is a little bit different for these 3 years. So we have the problem with kind of governmental media. We are divided for governmental media and other media. And this is also a big part of disinformation, some of politicians, but also, unfortunately, some of governmental journalists. It sounds even strange governmental journalists, but it is like this, like that. Unfortunately, they are trying to put some labels on, for example, on my company. We are, our owner is a company which is Swiss and German. And they are trying to prove to the society that we are serving to other governments or other countries, which is obviously ridiculous. But this is something what is really a big problem for us every day, day by day, because we have to handle this, let's say, PR problem, this image. So this is also kind of the kind of reality which we live in right now.
Marzena, talk to me about some issues that are going on in Poland that you've been covering that are examples of disinformation and ways that you and your staff have worked to kind of clear things up.
Okay, I would say I have some notes, and when I was thinking about disinformation, unfortunately, first thing what came to my mind was the word Twitter, because Twitter is extremely fast and it's the best source of information for all of us all over the world. So we all use Twitter. We are on Twitter. I have an impression that Twitter is the special planet for politicians and for journalists only. Nevertheless, we use it. We all use it. Because it's fast and it's, let's say, complete. We have all of the topics on Twitter, and that's also the big problem for us, because we have to be extremely vigilant for the sources. Sometimes we are I told about this hectic nature of journalists. Obviously, we see the news, we see the tweet, and we see that someone, for example, is writing that someone died, and we have to be extremely careful and always check the Twitter sources. It's a big risk and it's a big problem because, for example, we already noticed in Poland that we have one of the accounts on Twitter which is changing the name and publishing sometimes some fake news just to try if some journalist if some newsroom is going to catch it. Unfortunately, sometimes they do, and we did it once or twice as well, unfortunately, because it's so easy to do that now. So what we have to do, we definitely have to go back to the roots, because when the internet came, we were so excited. Oh my God, we have now all the information so easy accessible, and so it's so great for a journalist that I can click and I can check and I can just grab the news, grab the information. But unfortunately, the number of fake news and the number of disinformation is so big right now, because obviously politicians like that, like to blur the image of the reality. I can understand that. So we have to go back to the roots and really always to be very careful and to use 2 or more sources for one news, and that's the main thing, and not to Twitter accounts definitely, like I'm sorry. We have some cars with some limousines with very loudly going there, because we have the COP conference. You can't hear it probably, but we have this climate conference, very big one in Poland right now, and they are coming under my window all the time. Sorry. So be careful with the Twitter, and that's the big problem for us. That we are we want to be too fast. And second thing, very important, is that politicians love to say fake news and to say, for example, their opinions, like the news, which are not news but opinions only, just to as I said, to blur the image of the reality. This is also the big problem. Julian, he said about fact checking. Obviously, this is something we should do. We all should do, and we do. But I have to admit that at ONET we had the fact checking website. It was, I don't know, 4 years ago or something, and I have to admit it was very, very expensive. It was very expensive because checking all of the facts, all of the news, all of the promises of the politicians, it is, we have to say it is very, very expensive. And many times, in many times, it's not something, let's say, clickable. It's not something very popular for the people. Now I regret because we closed this website after half a year of having it, because it was not so popular. But now I regret, because now I know that in this political situation that we are now, and in this situation with such a lot of disinformation, we should have this website. So now we are trying to invent it again, to reinvent it and to have it because it's so important. The one more thing I wanted to say about is about comments under our articles. This is also something we have to be very careful, because here in Poland we have a lot of trolls. A lot of people hired, you can imagine by whom, who are writing the comments under the articles just to try to make this information less important, not so reliable, and that's a big problem. So what we did at ONET, not only because of that, but we had a big dilemma this year, but we decided finally to turn off all of the comments in our news channel. This is the problem, because, you know, internet should be free for everyone to say whatever they want. But the second question is, if we, as editors, journalists, if we want to be a platform for fake news and for saying stupid things, yes, and we started to question the importance of the comments. So this was not like 100% decision. We were not 100% sure, but we decided to change this system from commenting our articles under as a talkbacks, but we are encouraging our users to write the letters to us, to comment our articles on Facebook, on Twitter, on any other platform. That was a tough decision, but we don't regret it. It was very good, because the number of misinformation, sorry, we saw at this post was big, like crazy, really. It was too much.
Well, Marzena, thank you so much. And I think, I mean, we've got journalists here from dozens of different countries online. We've got plenty of others, and I'm sure you're all hearing the same thing that I'm hearing, that this is a global problem. It's interesting you talk about comments on online on stories. That's something that we see here in the United States very prevalently. Twitter, social media, bots that are sharing this misinformation. It's just incredible that this has become a 21st century problem that is affecting all of us across the globe, and not just one country or another. I want to go now to João Paulo, he is in Brazil. He's an investigative reporter there. João Paulo, tell us about some of your work and what you do there. I think he's muted. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Hey, there you are. We can hear you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Janelle. Thank you, Bob, Gary, Marianne, Cassandra, and my dear friend, Barbara Liborio, which is from Brazil, and she's participating on the program the same way I did last year in September. He's a very important fact checker in Brazil, Barbara. And I'm glad to stay.
She's red.
Yeah? Okay. That's what I wanted.
Mission accomplished.
Okay, great. I'm happy now. Listen, I'll tell you a very sad story about Brazil. We went to the polls on October to choose a new president here in Brazil. The winner was a far-right candidate called Jair Bolsonaro. He's a former army captain and a nostalgic from the dictatorship, someone who openly defends torture and attacks gays, black people, and minorities in general. He's a Donald Trump admirer, someone who opposes to the cultural Marxism, according to himself. According to Bolsonaro, the Marxism is controlling now the free press, the universities, and even the United Nations. This is our president now. Bolsonaro said that he was running against the communism during the election. There is no communism in Brazil right now, but it doesn't matter. In fact, the fact doesn't matter in this particular election in my country. This candidate, now the president, the elected president, Bolsonaro, built a strong network to spread false information during the entire election. He used not only the Facebook, not only the Twitter, but especially the WhatsApp, which is a very, very popular app in Brazil. And when journalists like myself, my colleagues here in Brazil, revealed that a group of businessmen were controlling hundreds of paid people to send thousands and thousands of messages with misinformation against his biggest opposer, Bolsonaro simply attacked the press and the journalists, saying that all that was fake news and that the press is opposition party, is enemy of the people. Here goes what perhaps the main example of the kind of fake news and false information that his campaign was massively distributing. He used to say that if his adversary wins, the communists would distribute baby bottles with a penis on its edge to babies and to small kids in public schools in Brazil. Then they were spreading photos of this by WhatsApp to thousands and thousands of people. The Bolsonaro's campaign has had no much money. He belongs to a very small party and counts with almost no support from any relevant politic in Brazil. But he made it, and he made it against the system. And now, once he was elected, he chose the press as one of his main enemies. And I can imagine how familiar it may sound to all of you in the United States right now. The lesson learned is that message services such as the WhatsApp are the heaven for those who want to spread false information. No one can really monitor what is going on within these groups. We can have an idea about what is going on Twitter and Facebook, but not on WhatsApp. It's a very secret kind of app to spread false information. Far-right leaders are getting powerful worldwide, and they are electing the free press as their enemy. The same way that left-wing populists used to do in the past. I think that if we don't stay together, as we are doing right now, have this kind of discussion, if we don't get out of our newsroom and talk to the people, talk to students at the schools, universities, at our communities, we are lost, because those guys are working all together in the same way that Donald Trump do United States, Bolsonaro do right now in Brazil, and the way we are seeing now in many countries in Europe. This week, our president appointed his new communication secretary, which is a guy that says that Folha de São Paulo, which is the main important newspaper in Brazil, is a communist newspaper. This is just an absurdity. And this is the kind of government journalists will have to face in the next year, in the next 4 years in Brazil. So I would like just to give this small portrait of what is going on in Brazil, because I think this is a sort of reality that probably will be spread in our region from now on in South America. And I think this is a huge threat for all of us working with journalism right now. That's what I would like to share with all of you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And that actually is an excellent segue to kind of the first thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is the idea of delegitimizing the press. As journalists globally, we're seeing a trend of where we're called the enemy of the people. We're called fake news. And I'd like to engage our panel to talk about how you're combating that, and if you're not able to fully combat it, what effect is it having on the work that you do? Do you feel like people are still taking your work seriously and trusting the work that you do? You're up, João Paulo. So let's just take it away with you again.
Okay, I guess we have to explain ourselves. That's what I believe. We have to go outside. We have to talk to the people, to give interviews, to write about it, and to tell what we do as journalists, and to explain that reporters are not enemies. Press is not an oppositional party, and the work that we do is to monitor what all those politicians are doing, and we do that in benefit of the whole society. But we have to explain that. We don't have to stay inside our newsroom waiting to people to just understand what we do. I think we have to teach some of our values and to explain why we do the things the way we do. And there is no other way. I mean, we have to expose ourselves, we have to talk to the people, and we have to tell what are the frames within the journalist is working in our respective countries.
How about you, Julian? What has your experience been like with this phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, it centers in some ways on the use of the word fake news, which is become quite viral, and it's something we're seeing used increasingly regularly in political discourse in South Africa. And campaigns that are taking place to undermine the press. Certainly, one of the parties I mentioned earlier, the Economic Freedom Fighters, which is a sort of or one could say a sort of fairly extreme left-wing populist organization, which itself is under fire and facing numerous corruption allegations involving its top leadership. They have mounted quite an sophisticated Twitter campaign, social media campaign to undermine their critics, and that includes people like the former finance minister in South Africa, Pravin Gordhan, who has been quite critical of them, journalists who are critical of them. But I think one of the difficulties we're facing in South Africa is that it's also been a pretty bad time for the press. Most notably the Sunday Times newspaper, which has had probably the worst sort of journalistic scandal in many years in South Africa around its reporting on the South African Revenue Service rogue unit allegations that I was talking about earlier, where it took what was a manufactured conspiracy created by political figures and dispersed by disgruntled former employees of that organization, and essentially swallowed it and churned it out week after week. I think there were 20-something stories with increasingly, more increasing sort of claims of, this investigations unit had illegally bugged the president's house. They'd started running a brothel to entrap politicians, etc., etc. And in that way, they gave it credence. And that same scandal then roped in various things. The auditing firm KPMG were also dragged into that. And it's done an incredible amount of damage, not only to that newspaper, but to journalism in this country. As I said earlier, I mean, I think the takeaway is that the falsehoods in that narrative were revealed by other investigative journalists, and it was other journalists who themselves picked apart this story. But it really is. I mean, as we get closer and closer to the election, I think the pressure is going to mount. Verbal and social media attacks on journalists are certainly increasing day by day. Thankfully, so far, we haven't seen that progress to actual violence being meted out against journalists. But it is a very, very difficult time. And I say that this can, in some ways, be dealt with if we do get the facts out. There's been some incredibly courageous reporting that's being done on some of these corruption allegations and so on. And I think we are also entering a phase where there is now, unlike in the Zuma years, there is a newfound willingness to try and tackle corruption at some level. We still haven't got to the point where, I think we are safe from corruption, or that there will be thorough and detailed investigations. But there are some encouraging signs.
Wonderful. Marzena, how about you?
I would say, first of all, we have to be extremely careful of what do we publish. We have to divide the news and opinion, and that this is basic, but it's even more important now. As Gianpaolo said, we have to be transparent as much as we can. When we are writing, we have to write about the process. How did we get the news? Where from? Which source? Obviously, if we can, so as much as we can, transparent. And we also have cannot lose the direction, because what I observe here in Poland, there's a big temptation to choose the political option and to support it openly or not openly, but support one of the political options. And I know it is different in different countries, but for me, and in my ideal journalist is as neutral as we can be. So because I know some situations where very good journalists, they were not writing that some politics of opposition, they did something wrong, because they don't they think this is not the time to criticize the opposition. And I'm saying no. I'm saying if any of politicians, no matter from which party, did something wrong, and we know that, we have to write about it, and we have to but I can understand this temptation that when this far right-wing party is attacking us as a journalists, we want to be on the second side, but we cannot be on any side in this political debate. And fourth thing, extremely important, is that we have to be we have to support journalistic environment, and we have to support each other, but also we have to be very careful and carefully point people who are sort of journalists, like for example, the person from governmental media is attacking me I cannot, I cannot be supportive for this kind of person, because we are not here to attack each other, but we have to have this moral, let's say, rule very, very clearly shown to the society.
Thank you. Paulo, what about sources? Do you find that the spread of disinformation is causing any sort of mistrust in the media that's making it harder for you to get people to talk to you and come to you with those sort of tips and things that help us to do our jobs?
Well, I think the most strange situation I'm facing right now is how to be able to listen to the people within this new government who speaks a lot of things that just make no sense. I mean, when the new foreign relations ministry is saying that the United Nations is a sort of Marxist complot, or that the climate change is not true, I mean, I find it difficult to take it seriously and to give a space to this sort of absurdity. I mean, they are putting the debate right now. These official sources are forcing the press, is forcing us to give space to horrible theories that usually would have no space in the public debate. So it's not only a political point of view about economy or politics or whatever, left wing, right wing, it belongs to the past. Now, the challenge that the press is facing is how to establish a good debate when you have in one side people saying this sort of absurdity. So should we as journalists and as a newspaper give the same space and make a sort of balance between arguments that belongs to the science in one side and arguments that just don't make sense in a scientific way? I mean, our own perhaps sometimes religious beliefs about how the world works. So this is the problem with sources now, because I have to have a relationship with authorities inside the government and to give space to them, even if they are attacking the climate change, attacking the press, attacking the only idea, the idea of that the United Nations is good, that human rights is useful. So should I give a space to this sort of statement against human rights in favor of dictatorship and torture? So this is the sort of problem that I have right now, is that those sources and those people became to be the government itself, and they usually have to have space because they are governing everyone here. But how to deal with this? How to deal with the sort of statement that are denying the values from the French Revolution, if you want? So how can I give a space to get back thousands of years in the civilization to establish a new debate in this level? So I may have sources within the government. They obviously want to spread the sort of information, but should I be the one who will give space for this sort of argument and this sort of debate? That's a big question for me right now.
That's such a great point, and that's something that we face here in the United States on a regular basis, is the question of, do you give space to, for example, scientific false science that we know has been disproven, just to try to appear impartial. And that's a huge question that we have to ask ourselves in newsrooms in the US every single day. Taking it to you, Julian, I know you're not actively working as a journalist these days anymore, but you're certainly still very much involved in the process. Is this something that you see in South Africa happening, that that people are grappling with, trying, who do you give a voice to, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's become a case here, and unfortunately, as in so many other countries, with they who shout the loudest tend to get the most coverage, and politicians who make the most extraordinary claims. And I think, ultimately it comes down to context, and context. It's trying to take those claims and report on them not in isolation, or not as a, sort of putting one side and then printing the other side, but actually trying to give readers the bigger picture and deeper understanding of where this originates from. And we have seen some very good reporting on that. I think one of the major difficulties that we have here, and again, it's a global problem, but is the slow decline of newsrooms. The Sunday Times, which I've spoken about quite a lot, was when I worked there, in the sort of early 2000s, had a staff of around 30 journalists. Today, it's got a fraction of that, probably half a dozen, plus freelancers and so on. And that's the leading Sunday newspaper in the country. We've seen so many newsrooms cutting back. Your quality checks and balances aren't necessarily in place. Sub-editors were the first to go, then photographers. Your news desk structure has changed completely from the way it used to be, where you had a number of checks and balances built in, through from your day editor, your news editor, right through to the night editor and the chief subs and the sub-editors. And that, process allowed for stories to be interrogated before they were published. And I think that, the point that was made earlier about we really need to be very careful what we publish, and checking and double checking our facts is so vital. But it comes down to capacity. If you're trying to contextualize these things, if you have a newsroom with half a dozen reporters, all of them running around chasing, several stories a day, do they have the time to give the context? And I think out of that, you've seen the emergence of smaller sort of niche websites. We have a fantastic website here called Daily Maverick, which really tries to dig into the context of what is happening, and investigate some of these claims. But there's also been an interesting thing where one of the political parties here banned journalists from, or some journalists from, his press conferences. It's been verbally abusing journalists, as I said earlier. And there's a debate raging here about, should journalists just boycott those press conferences? And there have been very strong arguments made that, well, no, actually they shouldn't. What they should do is go to the conferences, report and dig and investigate, and fact check all the claims that are actually being made.
Excellent. I'd like to give our audience an opportunity to ask some questions. Does anybody here in the audience have anything they'd like to ask our panel? Yes, can we pass around a microphone? Thank you. Can you stand and give us your name and tell us where you're from?
My name is Alex Otto. I'm from Uganda, and I have some questions, especially for Brazil. In regards to the president and the issues of fake news right now, a survey recently said that he's a very popular man. He allegedly has over 70%, and we know that surveys have also been used to propel fake news and propaganda. But if you look at media houses around the world, or even in Brazil, or even major newspapers, they are publishing those surveys and not being very critical of those surveys. I don't know what you think about that, especially the use of surveys in regards to giving out information. And then also, lastly, as this is now for the entire team, how are you guys, especially in relation to use of new media? Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp. How are you guys trying to combat that? Because These are platforms that are also good, especially in regards to sharing breaking news, in regards to sourcing for news stories. How are you making sure you don't run away from those new media, but you embrace it, mindful of the fact that you can also fall in the trap of fake news? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. I don't know if I understood your question, Alex, regarding Brazil. Is about the how the media was covering the president, the campaign. That's it. If it was fair or not, because he's a guy who had legitimacy. That's it. He was elected. That's it. Okay. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Listen, we had dictatorship in Brazil from 1964 to 1985. It's a very brutal dictatorship, a military dictatorship. But now, military people are back to the government, but in a democratic way. They were elected. 57 million people voted from them, and that's okay. That's perfect. There's no problem. And the media never attacked the candidacy, the election itself, or the candidate itself. There's no problem regarding this. I mean, the guy was running for the presidency and he won, and that's perfect. That's okay. The problem is that as a society, we choose to have certain standards that are in our constitution. Standards such as we are against torture, against crimes against the humanity, that were committed during the dictatorship. We are pro-democracy, etc. So and so. And when someone starts to attack this, I think that this is the role of the press to alert about the risk that we are facing. I mean, that's a surreal situation, because as a reporter, I'm not against any candidate. I can't be against any candidate. I'm just reporting to spread the information and to make interviews and to tell the people what this candidate is talking about, this and that, and etc. I don't want to oppose to anyone. But when someone starts, can you imagine this? When someone starts to speak loudly in favor of the dictatorship and in favor defending the torture, how should we as journalists report on that? It's a completely new situation for me and for all of us in Brazil. And I have no answer. It's an entirely new situation when the press to be critic and to have its role as to hold the people accountable of what they say. We have to be critics, and sometimes we look like we are doing opposition to the government, and that's not the case. But when someone is attacking so deeply our values, how should journalists and the press react to this? I think that we are just pointing the problems. So you can't be against democracy. You can't be a nostalgic from the dictatorship that killed thousands of people in Brazil. And by doing this, we are perceived as an opposition party. I understand that. But we are only standing against human rights violations and war crimes and torture and etc. I can't imagine a press and a journalist that wouldn't stand for those values that are in our constitution. So it's a strange situation. By defending the minimal rules, we are being perceived as a political party. That's it.
Let's go to Marzena for the second part of your question here, and this was regarding how do you stay engaged with new media, Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp. How do you stay engaged and share your stories and your reporting on those mediums while still being cautious of the threats that now exist in those mediums in terms of misinformation being spread or perhaps facts being misconstrued as not facts? Marzena, what are some of your thoughts on that?
Before I will answer, I just want to add something about what Joao was saying, that I think my answer to you, Joao, is that you have to be transparent, because obviously you should do exactly what you did now. So explain to the people that you are not supporting any political party, any political movement, but you are supporting your values like democracy, like human rights, and so on. And we have to repeat it on and on, on and on. And I hope I'm idealist, that's my problem. But I still believe people will hear that message, and they will trust us that we really do that, because we are fighting for something more than supporting any political party. That's it. That's what I believe in. And talking about social media, we used to say these are frenemies. So friends and enemies in one time. Enemies because they are, first of all, they are stealing the time of our users. And we, as a news website, we want to have people to spend their time on our website, not on Facebook, on Twitter, or anywhere else. So in this part, they are our enemies. On the second hand, they are our friends, because they are helping us to spread our links, our content, our articles. So we have to be very careful and very conscious about how do we do that. So we at ONET, we have a special department. They are taking care of publishing our stories on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and wherever they can. Sometimes these are different stories that on our homepage, because we have to know that sometimes this is totally different audience. But what I think is the most important is investing in our brand, investing in the trust to our reports, to our articles. We need to be very careful, and we need to make some kind of public relations things to tell them that we really are the best source of information for them, not Twitter, not Facebook, because there you can find many different sources, many trolls, many informations that are not so reliable as our reports.
Wonderful. I actually have a question for Julian. How long has this been going on? I mean, we've long experienced the phenomenon of my media is better than your media, left media versus right media. There's always been a certain amount of disdain, I think, that we've faced as journalists, but it's obviously become more rampant. When did you see that start, Julian? I think that you're a good person to ask this question of, because you do so much fact checking. What do you see there?
I mean, I think, you know, the shift has been particularly pronounced in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, but there was a gradual movement, at least in South Africa. South Africa, you know, took to Twitter a bit later than some places. It's become incredibly popular here. Facebook has always been quite popular. But I'd say, you know, it's the degree to which this is happening and the sort of the silos that are being created have become more and more pronounced here in the last 5 or 6 years. And, you know, you've seen on different sides of the political spectrum, you know, the extreme right, who for a long time, in fact, longer than some of the more mainstream and some of the more popular political parties here, have used Facebook or social media sites or even their own websites and their own chat groups as a place to find refuge among like-minded people, you know, and share the conspiracy theories that they do share. You know, I mean, we were looking, for instance, in I think it was 2012, at claims that were doing the rounds on Facebook in South Africa, published by a very popular Afrikaans singer, who has remodeled himself as something of a voice for the Afrikaner right. And you know, he was making various claims about the crime rates in South Africa and trying to put together this very racially skewed picture of crime in South Africa. I mean, essentially he was trying to argue that white South Africans are less likely to commit crimes and black South Africans are more likely to commit crimes. And it was this very contorted, distorted, ugly, racist argument that he was pushing across. And, you know, it spread like wildfire on Facebook. And we came across this and investigated some of the claims. I mean, he'd concocted murder rates from the 1980s, comparing them to murder rates in the 1990s and 2000s. You know, in one case, he borrowed statistics from an entirely different country to bolster his theory. And, you know, it gained credibility because of who he was. You know, he wasn't seen as, you know, while he's emerged now as a sort of leading voice for these particular right-wing groupings, at the time he was seen as more mainstream. And, you know, that gave it a lot of credence. And we unpacked that. And, you know, the backlash was quite something to behold. You know, my researcher received death threats. You know, one of our researchers was threatened with rape, which seemed to be a common thing on social media. As part of the work, I got a letter from someone who described himself as a God-fearing supporter of this particular individual, and then he wished that my children were murdered. So there's some lovely people. So I think, you know, those are the sorts of challenges that you're dealing with. But these silos have now grown, you know, and they've extended to other parts of the political spectrum. And, you know, on Twitter, for instance, which has really gained popularity in the last 4 or 5 years, in South Africa, it's become the perfect platform for, you know, fake bots, plus people aligned to specific parties to go after their critics and try and undermine them and attack them. You know, so I saw a piece recently with a journalist who'd been counting tweets that were attacking, you know, one particular individual, and I think there was something like 70,000 tweets over a span of 2 months. You know, and it's a clearly a strategic campaign to discredit them.
I'm going to take another audience question here in just a, okay, we'll take it now then. Gentleman right here, yes. You know what, let me have you, do you see that camera back there? If you want to face that way our panelists can see you as you're asking them a question.
Hello, my name is Usman Shahid and I'm from Pakistan. I'm so pleased to be part of this historic moment. My question is that, don't you realize the problem gets more deeper and more bigger when you come across the scandal like Cambridge Analytica, which we did witness last year, when we witnessed the major data breach, which resulted in the manipulation of Brexit and the American election as well, and which Mark Zuckerberg lately at that time did concede in the congressional hearing, and while he did express the concerns about Pakistan elections, because 2018 was the big year for the when it comes to the election across the world in Mexico, Brazil, Hungary, Pakistan, India, and the midterm cycle here. So a country like Pakistan, where the journalists have got the capacity issues and we are not that tech savvy, what plausible recourse you suggest for the journalist not to get swayed in this propaganda warfare and to curb this menace? Thank you.
All right, I guess we'll go to you, now, Paulo.
Okay, I certainly don't have the answer. I'm sorry, but I think we should be pretty aware about what you say when you talk about Cambridge Analytica, not only about this particular business, but to any sort of use or misuse of social media in the same way that they did in the past. If you go to the Brazilian campaign, Bolsonaro's campaign, we know that his son met Steve Bannon in New York City before the election. And they were exchanging information about the use of internet and social media. So we don't know precisely how they cooperated with each other, but we know that Steve Bannon was helping the far-right candidate here in Brazil the same way he's trying to do in Europe right now. In fact, Steve Bannon moved from United States to Europe, and we know that he is working closely with some far-right politicians down there, especially in France. So if you look now to the protests in France, I think this is a very interesting situation because Emmanuel Macron, I consider that he perhaps is the most influential international leader fighting against the extreme right populism right now and trying to preserve somehow the European Union. He and Angela Merkel in Germany. So it is strange that a popular movement starting from the internet articulation try to set him down in this particular moment when he is criticizing so much Donald Trump, for instance. And we have experienced something very similar in Brazil in 2013, when hundreds and thousands of people went to the streets to protest against something very particular and something very small, which was the price of the public transportation in São Paulo. And it became a huge and massive movement with no ideological frame that leads to the impeachment of the president and now with the election of those far-right candidates. So I'm very suspicious about the use of social media and all those tools that I think is not completely neutral. And I think that we don't really understand how deep they are having influence in our dynamics. So I don't want to be to talk about conspiracy. That's not my kind of approach of those topics. But I don't think we fully understand how those networks really works.
I would like also to tell something about Polish topic, because we had presidential elections about a year before American elections, and we had our to win again, and half a year before the elections he had 70% of support in the polls, 70%, but he lost. And the experts were saying that our new president, Law and Justice Party candidate, he won because he won in the internet. He was very good in making, buzz in the internet, and that's why he won. But now, after 3 years after the election, we know that actually they were using Cambridge Analytica. and because it was a kind of a test before the American elections. Now we know that because it's they openly said. So what we can do, we cannot try to avoid the situations like that, but our duty is to write about these mechanisms, is to write about things like Cambridge Analytica and whatever will happen again, because it will happen, and we are sure that it will. So we have to write about it, and in a very specific way. We have to explain to the people why is it risky to use social media only. It is risky because they use algorithms and they don't show the reality in the whole 360 dimension.
I wonder what our panel thinks about social media in terms of taking down misinformation. There's been, I know, a lot of news headlines around Facebook questioning whether or not that platform should better police its website to remove hate-filled speech, things like that. What do our panelists think? And let's start with you, Marzena, since you're on screen. What do you guys think about, I guess, censoring social media to a certain degree?
You think about algorithms. You think about algorithms which show us the opinions which are only connected with our opinions. Am I right? Yeah, it's a kind of bubble. We all live in this small or big bubbles, in bubble of our own opinions. This is very dangerous. It's extremely dangerous, and I think again we should write about it. We should write about these algorithms. We have to know as much as we can about these algorithms. It's tough because we as a journalist, we are more about literature. We are not about algorithms. It's not our natural environment, so it's tough. But we definitely have to try to understand these mechanisms and try to explain it to the people in the most clear way. This is extremely important because they should be aware and they should be conscious of how they can be used or how they can be disinformed by social media.
How about you, Julian? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, in a South African context, our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, enshrines freedom of expression, but we do have laws in place which limit hate speech. And there have been a number of cases here where people have posted some particular, primarily cases where people have posted sort of threatening or racist comments on social media or attacked people on social media. And there have been a couple of court cases where people have been charged and tried in those cases. I think that the way that South Africa's constitution works is that freedom of expression generally should come out top, and that the laws that are in place to govern hate speech, are done in such a way that they, will need to be quite carefully applied, because it could be something that if it were to be abused, could be used to crack down on freedom of expression. So that has been the approach here. We've also had the case with some of the bots that I was talking about earlier, which attacking people or spreading sort of fairly hateful conspiracy theories, where there have been quite active campaigns by social media users to report those bots and get them shut down. And that came to a head last year, particularly around the time of the Bell Pottinger case that I was talking about earlier, this PR firm in South Africa, which was hired to start a social media campaign to protect their client from allegations of corruption involving the president, and created dozens of bots that would spread conspiracy theories or attack particular people. And again, we're seeing that now with the EFF, the political party I was talking about earlier. So they happen that way.
Paulo, you are in Brazil, where you've described a new government that is advocating for torture, for example. How does this come into play where you are?
How does this come? What? Sorry.
Hate speech and social media. How does that come into play in Brazil?
Well, now people are just defending openly this sort of thing in Brazil, because if the president is doing bad, what is the problem to speak out and to defend the dictatorship or the torture, etc.? So it's an unbelievable moment. We are now remembering today the 50th anniversary of the most violent bill that the military dictatorship approved in 1964. It was a bill that established the censorship and the persecution against the opposition, and from 1964 started the most violent period of the Brazilian dictatorship. And I wrote something about this history, and we just published today, telling the story, how it was, what was exactly the content of this bill, and etc. And if you go to the link in social media, you will find a lot of Brazilians defending this bill and defending the dictatorship and defending censorship and torture, because they say, as our elected president is saying right now, that it was good because it was against the communism, and that you can do everything against communism. But we don't really have communism. It doesn't matter. I think he's using this speech the same way that Donald Trump, for instance, used the speech against migrants. I mean, you as a populist, and you have populists from far right, for far left, whatever you want. But populists always build a story with good people against bad people. And the bad people may be migrants, it may be communists, it doesn't matter. You just choose someone to be against. And you manipulate the people with a sort of speech. And that's what they are doing. So the reality, again, I will say, doesn't matter too much. What matters is to join millions of people against a common enemy. And that's why this candidate could have so much people in his side defending this sort of hate speech, because the violence is always against someone else. You never think that someone will torture you. So it's easy to go to the internet and to defend torture against an enemy. It doesn't matter who it is. But just to make an important point for me, I will never be in favor of to limit the freedom of speech, even in internet, and even if people are arguing in favor of racism or hate speech of any kind. I think that we have to have more voices defending what is right, defending human rights. I don't believe in censorship in any moment, censorship of any kind. So I will always be against any law that try to restrict the freedom of expression, even if it is in favor of human rights. It doesn't matter. I think that the solution is to have more voices, to have more education, to have a press freedom, etc., not to try to limitate social media or internet in any kind.
Great, thank you so much. Let's take another audience question. Let's hear from you in the front. Right in the front here. Lovely lady with the burgundy shawl.
Camera, please. This one.
Back there. Over there.
Okay, I'm Christelle from Côte d'Ivoire, and I would like to talk with a dear friend from Poland. Have you ever, while seeking or telling the truth, faced some threat or attack? If yes, how did you manage the situation? If no, is it coming sometime to your mind that it can happen? Thank you.
All right, Marzena?
Yeah, we have a lot of attacks in the internet, obviously. I have many haters on Twitter. Warm greetings for them. I think this is sometimes we have this anonymous people that are just writing about us in the internet that we are doing something wrong and we are stupid and we are supporting this I don't know bad liberal party or totally against that we are supporting this bad conservative party or something. So this is a lot of things written in the internet. This is one thing, but we also face some let's say politicians attack. Some of them were making statements that they will change the law according to the media in Poland, and this is their weapon to threaten us. We will establish a new law, and we will cut the hegemony of German media in Poland, and we will establish the law when the foreign companies will cannot have more than, I don't know, 20% of the ownership of Polish media companies. This is also something we are facing day by day almost. So these attacks are different, and but everything is done to threaten us to. But we are not afraid. We are not afraid at all. We cannot be. We are journalists. We just have to fight for the truth and for working in these hectic times as calm as we can, as conscious as we can. And but this is true that this is not something nice, and this is sometimes very depressing. When I am reading, for example, on Twitter that I'm compared to the women who were meeting the Nazi soldiers during the Second World War because I am working for the German company. You can imagine, this is really something disgusting, to be honest. But you know, no one said that journalism is a profession for weak, sensitive people. We have to be strong and support each other.
Absolutely. Any other questions from the audience? This lovely lady with a silver scarf.
Hi. Okay, so I go
over here.
What?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. The question is for Julian and also for Marcena. In South Africa, if you can share us more about the experience of Africa Check, how can we make this sustainable? I'm from Mexico, and this is also a movement. Right now, we have a new president. He has all the House, the majority of the Senate also, and almost the majority of new mayors in different cities. And in Poland, also, what were the mistakes that you commit that you are going to change now to to have this fact checking in your newsroom, and how to can we can do this sustainable? Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that question. I think that it's very difficult to keep it sustainable. You know, we've seen quite a number of fact-checking websites come and go. As far as I'm aware, I think at the present moment there are around 150 fact-checking websites globally. And you know, Africa Check has, I think we've had very supportive donors over the years. That donor portfolio has expanded somewhat. You know, people who've been really committed to the project. But also, there is, you know, when Africa Check started in 2012, there were only a handful of fact-checking websites around the world. PolitiFact was the main one in the US, FullFact in the UK, and a couple of others scattered around. You know, today you have an extensive network. There's now an international fact-checking network that is based at the Poynter Institute in the US. And, you know, I would encourage you to talk to them, you know, about setting something up like that. If you'd like to ask Gary, I can send you a couple of contact details of people you could speak to. But you know, and I think that through that fact-checking network, what they're trying to do at Poynter is actually support and encourage the development of other fact-checking websites. So certainly there. And then on Africa Check, if you go to africacheck.org, there's quite a lot of background about the website, the donors, how it's structured, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you so much. Gary, Marianne, are you going to be taking the group 2 Poynter? They went yesterday. Excellent. So you guys are familiar. That's based here. And yeah, it is a fantastic organization with resources aplenty, from fact checking to you know, just keeping up with changes in journalism, trends, things like that. And they host a lot of seminars, both online and here at their home base in St. Petersburg. So it's definitely something worth paying attention to. Big thumbs up. Who else do we have some questions from? Oh, I'm sorry, what was the other part of that question?
In the fact check in Poland, the mistakes that they did, they are going to change now.
Do you mean?
Yes, because she said, Marcena said
they had gotten rid of their fact
this
checking
4 years ago, and they closed it.
So Marzena, you had said that it was kind of a money suck, right? It was very expensive. So was there anything else besides that was prohibitive for you guys keeping your fact checking operation running? And what are you doing now to bring that back?
Yeah, what we did is 4 or 5 years ago was we hired one journalist, and he was sitting and day by day he was checking what the politicians are saying in the parliament, and he was writing about their statements, and he was checking it. But as I said, it was not very efficient. It was not very popular for the people. First of all, times were much more calm, and it was not the problem of misunderstandings and disinformation like now. So now I see that people, when we are publishing something like fact checking, it is much more popular. So first advice is just start to do that, and the second thing is maybe don't try to make the big channel, the big service, the big websites from it, but but try to involve it in your daily routine. Like when you catch something, some politician is saying something wrong, you just have to grab it and to write about it and to try to make this fact checking. So now we are not inventing a big project. We are just writing some articles, but it is very useful to add also at the headline of the article that it's fact checking part. It's very like have a brand like True From Meter. I think it's very very good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes. Oh, you guys are confusing me.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Femi Olanikwe. I'm from Nigeria. My question is to Julian. I'm deeply appreciative of the work Africa Check is doing on the African continent. I've come across some of your efforts in Nigeria. Thank you very much for the great work you're doing. But I'd like to call your attention to the fact that it seems Africa Check is majorly based in the newspapers, I mean with the print, and you agreed with me that the bulk of Africa's population, especially in my country, Nigeria, I know that's the same for the other parts of Africa, is largely rural. And if you're going to counter disinformation and misinformation, I think we also need to factor in the broadcast media, especially radio, which is powerful in the grassroots. If you're countering disinformation alone in the print media, you may not be getting to the base, attacking it and tackling it effectively if you just restrict it only to the print. So I'd like to ask you if you're considering that, considering working with the broadcast medium, especially radio, because of the effectiveness at the grassroots level, or if you have something like that in the works. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I can't speak for what Africa Check is doing at the moment in Nigeria, as I'm not involved directly in that. I now work for another organization, but certainly that discussion is something that's come up time and time again. You know, and how do we reach people? You know, South Africa, it's exactly the same thing. Is most of the people that you want to reach, radio, television are your best options. And I think, you know, online platforms, despite the fact that we do have, you know, growing access to smartphones, to mobile phones, for most people, trying to read it is difficult. You know, it costs data is expensive, etc. So I think radio is a very key one. I know that, you know, when I was involved on the South African side, we did make a targeted effort, and we ended up doing regular radio broadcasts, which are actually still going on to this day, on a couple of radio stations. And you know, it would be an hour-long program about fact-checking once a month. In some cases, with another station, it would be much shorter inserts on, you know, what the big fact checks of the week were and so on. So I'd agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, I think that, you know, radio is key to this. And, you know, I think in Nigeria, the difficulty probably has been is also, you know, trying to, well, get people to use the website. And what we have done for a long time with Africa Check is to, when stories are produced, we make that copy available free of charge to various newspapers, publications, TV stations, radio, etc., for them to republish. So I think what you're seeing is a lot of that pickup, because all of those stories are actually being posted on the website. But I think, you know, radio is something that certainly would need to be developed. It's key to work we've done in other countries.
Excellent. Thank you for the question. I think we're coming over here next. Hey, tell us your name and where you're from.
I'm Yannick from Malta. My question is for Marzena. I'm wondering, you said you closed your comment boards. I'm wondering whether this has affected the traffic on your website and whether it's just transferred the problem onto Facebook where you're less able to moderate it.
Great question. Marzena.
First of all, I'm very happy that person from Malta asked the question because I love Malta. Valletta is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Well, this was, as I said, tough decision, but numbers are very good for us, I would say, and are supporting the decision because we saw that we have only 2% of the traffic from the comments, 2%, and so it was not such an important number to keep the comments. And now we are definitely not seeing any problems in general. It's it's not a big problem when we think about numbers, but we're checking the numbers before we did this decision. Definitely, you have to check how is it at your website. And second part of the question, I didn't understand. Sorry.
Have you shifted the problem of nasty comments from your website to Facebook?
Nasty comments from my website to Facebook. No, obviously not. Facebook is a free platform, and we can tell them to we cannot avoid, for example, nasty comments. But as every user of Facebook, we can write to them and ask kindly to take off this or that comment, but only if this is not suiting to their regulations. And that's it. That's what we can do. But on the other hand, we also have this legal problem because for a very long time in Poland, the law was very clear that the publisher is not responsible for the comments, and that was okay because I can remember I worked on it for 18 years, and when I started working here, the biggest room, the biggest group of people working here were moderators. Moderators were sitting and reading every comment under every article and approving or deleting the comments. After my website, our website started to be bigger and bigger, we couldn't do that anymore because the comments we had, like, I cannot remember the precise numbers, but it was like 70 million of comments per month, something like this. So it was, it was impossible to moderate it and to approve or to delete every single comment. So we had a lot of algorithms. They are sometimes useful also for publishers. But it was a big story. I can't talk about it like for half an hour because we were, first of all, the algorithm was throwing the comments which had some, curses or something, but it's very hard for the algorithm to find and to detect the hate speech. And this was also something we didn't want to have under our articles. So this was very, very tough. So our algorithm, what we decided to do, it was promoting the most useful comments and putting it on the top of the whole list. So this was some kind of the solution, but it was not enough. And the last year we had the first decision from the court, which made one of our Polish publishers responsible for the comment they were having. Obviously, nothing official from the editorial part. It was users' opinion, but some of the politicians sued the newsroom, the company, that they shouldn't publish things like that. So it even made the whole system more risky for us, because we don't have money to pay for the politicians for the opinions of the users. And as we know, these opinions sometimes are extremely cruel. So this was also the argument in the discussion. So we don't, we were very careful. We did it very slowly. First of all, we were closing the common system on the small piece of our channel, and but it was optimistic in terms of numbers, and by the way, we have the disclaimer in the place where before we had this comment part, and we are actually encouraging our users to write his or her opinion, but on Facebook or on Twitter, and that's why they are sharing our articles even more. They are likely to do that. So this is good news that we can somehow even make our reach bigger because of that.
Make lemons out of lemonade. Let's go over here for another question. In the beige, thank you.
Thank you. I am Isabel from Bolivia. I feel that we are attacking just symptoms of a huge illness. Do you think it's enough to do this to close some spaces of opinion or even fact-checking? How could we do as journalists to kill this huge illness?
So the question, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is how do we do something bigger than just fact-checking, and some of the solutions that we've been talking about today to get rid of what is a much larger problem than just isolated incidents of misinformation? What are some larger solutions that maybe we could begin to start implementing? Do you want to go ahead and start, since you're up, Marzena?
Well, this is very philosophical question, how to deal with all malfunction in this world and all the wrong things in this world. And obviously, if we will put this problem like this, that we want to eliminate the problem as a whole situation, we are losers. We cannot win like this. So in my opinion, we have to do what we can, and we are actually doing this. And we have these beautiful examples from Brazil, from South Africa, and we are here in Poland. We are trying to do the best as well. I'm sorry, I don't have the solution, the medicine for the whole problem.
I think if we did, we'd all be in a much different boat right now. How, Paulo, do you have any ideas?
Do
we have? I think you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There we go. Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I am mute sometimes to don't interfere.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. I believe very much in media literacy programs. I really think that we have to educate people, especially young people and children. I think that education is the best way to deal with that. And we need more public debate. We need more space to people talk about whatever they want. And I don't think we should get back to any previous moment in our history, thinking that with less communication or less internet or less social media, we would be in a better situation. I don't believe it. And I think that we have to work with young people to educate them, not only about the use of the internet and fake news, whatever, but about history, about facts, about science. I think that this is a challenge for all education, all the education system, all the professors, universities, etc. So I strongly believe that we have to pursue this way towards the knowledge and the science. And perhaps it sounds very Illuminist, but I don't think we have another solution to this. Press is only one small part of the problem and only a small part of the solution as well. We have to be close to the schools, universities, and try to improve the average of the knowledge within our societies. I see no other way besides education and especially media literacy right now.
Julian, how about you? Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree largely with those points. I mean, I think that's the big challenge that we have, in South Africa, where we have an education system that is in disarray. And, we have significantly higher levels of poverty, people who, over 40% of youth between the ages of 18 and 35 are unemployed. It's a big problem. People are not getting the educations that are leading to jobs, and that leads to a buildup of resentment that also leads to them, becoming ears for some of the more extreme elements within the political spectrum. But I also think, it's about doing what we do. It's about doing journalism. It's about reporting accurately, honestly. It's about ensuring that our facts are correct. It's about challenging these notions. That for me is the role that we play. We're not going to change everyone's opinion or change everyone's mind overnight. But it's, every little bit counts in the bigger picture. So I think it's unfortunately, it seems in many ways, I mean, also similarly to the work that I'm doing these days, it seems like such an overwhelming problem that, you wake up in the morning and you go, well, what on earth can I actually do about this? And I think it's the little bits that count. It's those, it's doing what you do as best as you can, and going out there and challenging those narratives, publishing accurate stories, correcting facts and distortions that come into the public sphere.
Thank you so much, Julian. We're starting to run low on time here, but we probably have time for one, maybe two more questions. Over here in the corner. Microphone's coming your way.
Okay, I'm Marang Michael from South Sudan. Maybe my question also will go back to Julian from South Africa. Also, I'm working in a radio station, but looking on how we can fight this issue of disinformation and fake news. Looking to the context of Africa, Juliana, how we can help as a radio stations, in letting people not to spread more misinformation or disinformation, because sometimes, I don't know, maybe this misinformation behind after them political agenda and also with the same to fake news, but it's sometimes difficult for radio station to rush in and do something, maybe because with the context of Africa, you can lose your life, or you can be targeted, or you can, leave the country. So let me know from you, how can we intervene in the middle to rescue the situation before things go worse than this? Like, for example, we have two misinformation that gone out, the one of the president of Nigeria and the one of my president that he has died, and it took 2 days, and when we called the press secretary of the president, he said, I don't have idea about that, I don't know. So, and the news is still going on. In this case, what should we do? Until the president come out and say, I'm here alive, I didn't. He have to move on all the roads of the city for 2 days for people to know. So in such a case, what can we do?
So what's the role of radio in Africa to help eliminate the amount of disinformation that is floating around out there, Julian?
Yeah, no, I think radio is a vital tool, and we were talking about that a bit earlier in the context of Nigeria and South Africa. I think that one of the difficulties with fact checking, and also one of the luxuries in the way which is what I enjoyed so much about it, was that unlike day-to-day news reporting, fact-checking types of stories, that sort of subset of journalism, well, it's actually become more than a subset of journalism, but it gives you the time to properly check facts, statements of fact that are made by politicians or people in power and people in places of influence. And you because of the nature of Africa Check and the website, the way that it was put together, we were able to take the time to actually properly check facts, to find the data, to find the research materials, to do the interviews that were necessary. It's not something necessarily that can be rushed. In some cases you can get something up very quickly, but in a lot more complex cases you can't. In the case that you mentioned about whether the president is alive or not, that's something that's come up a lot in this part of the world around Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, whose death has been rumored numerous times over the years. And that in a way is something that's incredibly difficult to check. I mean, I think that what you're trying to check there's not necessarily is a statement that has been made that he's died. But you sometimes have to wait for him to reemerge, or wait for those details. I think the sorts of things that we were looking at were more political claims, falsehoods that are statements of fact by politicians, making various claims or overinflating claims. We built X number of schools. Well, did you really? That sort of thing. So yeah, it's not easy, but I think that radio is critical, and certainly in that part of the world too. It would be something that if you did want to look into that, I would encourage it.
Thank you so much, Julian. Do we have time for one more, or should I wrap it up? All right, let's do one more. In the back here.
Thank you. My name is Leslie Moyo. I'm from Zimbabwe, and my question is directed to Julian. You spoke a lot earlier on about the polarization of the media, especially towards election or during the election period. And in South Africa and also in Zimbabwe, there's this phenomenon we've seen creeping up, especially on social media, where people talk about black Twitter. They also talk about white Twitter. And I've seen also the media being caught up in this phenomenon where they just go there for the entertainment value. For instance, there are so-called Twitter wars where politicians, they exchange words, even insults on social media, and the media laps up on this. But just for the entertainment value. But what then should be done, especially, I know South Africa is going for elections next year, especially for the media to remain playing its role as the watchdog, and is playing its role of not only informing, but also educating the people.
Thank you for the question.
I was actually saying that sort of society is polarized, not the media alone earlier. But you raise a very good point. I mean, I call it lazy journalism. It's cheap, it's easy, it gets you clickbait. There are so many publications that are desperate for readers, desperate to attract people in this part of the world. And that's what they resort to. I mean, there are awful stories that appear on some of the local news websites here, where essentially it's a collection of tweets that have been strung together with a paragraph or two trying to explain what's going on in the latest sort of Twitter war between a celebrity or a politician. And it's pretty mindless, but it gets a lot of clicks. It gets a lot of clickbait. And I think, from my perspective, I think there's a responsibility from media houses to go beyond simply looking at, how many clicks can we get, to actually reporting responsibly and about, real issues. Unfortunately, it's also about money. And I think for many media houses, trying to strike that balance has proved to be incredibly difficult. Trying to find the stuff that'll bring the viewers in, and then finding the more in-depth stuff that'll keep them there potentially, or will it keep them there in some cases? And I think this is a challenge, globally. It's something, the media landscape is changing so rapidly and so quickly. It's a challenge that everyone is facing these days. But I think that particularly around sort of election time, if you're dealing with those kinds of issues, or Twitter comments that are meant to inflame tensions, there needs to be a responsibility on the part of the newspapers about how they cover those sorts of things.
Thank you so much. Well, that about wraps it up. So I want to say thank you to all of our panelists, Marzena, Julian, and João Paulo. Thank you to everybody who's been here for your wonderful questions and engagement on this very important issue. And for all of you watching abroad, thank you as well. I'm going to turn it back over now to Gary Springer from World Partnerships to close us out.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Janelle, for, I can't believe you sat on that stool for 2 hours. That
I
was
got up for a little while.
pretty amazing there. And thank you from the bottom of our hearts, Julian and Marzena and Jean Paulo for being with us and engaging so completely with our group here. I want to just close by saying one thing before I get on to instructions as to what we do next. This afternoon, we're going to have a panel with a military journalist, Howard Altman, who's going to be moderating the second panel of the afternoon. On that panel are going to be two chief spokespersons for one for U.S. Special Operations Command, one for U.S. Central Command. Special Operations Command, as you all know, is a worldwide command. Central Command is, you know where that is. The third person that's going to be on there is the head of information operations with Special Operations Command. That means that's the person that really looks at countering disinformation, countering violent extremism on a very regular basis. And I want, we've taken from your peer journalists today from around the world some very, very interesting takeaways, including media literacy, media education, some good solutions, and to keep doing what you do. And I want to just add one last thing. 4 weeks ago, we hosted almost 100 international security officials from, I think, 80 some odd countries, Mary Ellen, 86 countries. We did a 4-hour, kind of like we're doing here, but it was a 4-hour closing session, plenary session, where they could converse back and forth with panels of their peers. 4 hours. They talked about countering violent extremism. They talked about information operations. They talked about bringing imams in to give different types of education. They talked about bringing other religious in. They talked about, I can tell you, they talked about everything that you can imagine. The one thing they did not talk about was the role of journalists. We did not hear in 4 hours of conversation the word journalist or media once. So I think that's also one of the big challenges that sits out there for all of you to ponder over during lunch, but also for a time to come. Journalism, as many say, and as has been talked about here today, is probably the most important component because you're independent and people do listen, and you do this every day. And yet we find in so many situations of, especially in violent extremism areas, where journalists are not being even paid attention to by governments, law enforcement, the military, intelligence operations. So this afternoon ought to be also an interesting opportunity to talk with these guys about how often they talk to the press. We are going to close out now. Again, panel, thank you all so much. Will, do I ask you to get us over to lunch, or how do we do this? Will, come over here and talk. This is Will Miller, who's also been extremely helpful in getting this thing going. I'm Gary.
Pleasure to meet you.
It's great to
Nice
meet you.
How's everybody doing today? So far, so good? They showed you where the restrooms were, right? Very important. And then lunch is the next most important thing. Am I right? Good. Well, we'll be happy to show you to the lunchroom. Does everybody have their credit cards or cash or something? You ready to pay? Good. That's important as well. Nice to have you all. We're going to give you a little bit of a tour after lunch, but first, let's go eat, okay? Great. Yes.
That was awesome. Thank you. You were
Fabulous. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take the good luck. Actually, I'll let you do
This concludes the broadcast. Thank you for joining us.